kilohertz, and then we needed output capacitances and inductances for current ripple. Here's our simulation results. As expected, we had our 48 volts, which is what matters for an e-bike. 42 amps is fine. 40 amps, 42 amps doesn't really make a difference when you're dealing with e-bikes because their controllers decide the current.
Okay, well, we don't have time to talk about all of the considerations for PCB design. I learned most of it from scratch just starting this project, but anyway, a couple of key ones. We went with a 4-layer board with signal layers on the top and bottom and ground plane in the middle. We use that ground plane to isolate our most important signals, mainly our switch node and feedback signals. We also used some via stitching around each of the inductors. Those are those big squares on the top layer to help shield our inductors. Lastly, we just, wherever possible, we used larger traces, kept the spacing as wide as possible, minimized parallel lines, and lastly, we have exposed copper for the output and input nets.
All right, so the third part of our project was voltage regulation for different IC supply voltages. Now we needed 15 volts, 12 volts, 5 volts, and 3.3 volts that were coming. We were using the battery voltage, so we needed to account for the super high current in that battery just in case. So we used high current buck converter ICs that were rated for high efficiency and also had protection. So here's our design. So some of the calculated and tuning required was just the output voltage resistor divider, output inductance, frequency setting resistor. Of course, like I said, all of these pins have actual required, recommended, or ranges that you need to use, but we just don't have time to go over them all. Here's our output results. We've got all of our expected voltages from each of our voltage supplies. Now actually implementing it. So here's our PCB. This is just a top layer PCB with a bottom layer ground plane. We made it, we soldered it, we broke it. Well, honestly, the 15 volt and 12 volt supplies work perfectly at several voltages that are above and below 43 volts. The only issue was that the two resistors got burnt out in the 5 volt and 3.3 volt sections, but we didn't have backups. We learned our lesson, get it soldered in China. It's more expensive, but it's better.